Houston, Texas, U.S. Armed Forces Induction Center, April 28, 1967, 9:15 a.m. The air in this room, lined with cheap plastic panels, wasn't just stale. It was toxic, soaked in the smell of male sweat, bureaucratic despair, and that specific sticky fear that arises when a person realizes their life no longer belongs to them. In the center of this stifling cube, under the deathly hum of fluorescent lights, stood a U.S. Army general, his face looking like an overripe beet, gorged with blood with every passing second, and the veins on his neck bulged as if ready to burst and splatter his perfectly pressed uniform. In his right hand, gloved in white, a heavy rubber baton trembled. He didn't raise it to point the way. He raised it to strike. And the target of this strike was not a wooden dummy, but the head of a man who stood before him absolutely motionless, as if carved from black granite. The general was certain he was about to break this upstart. He was about to beat patriotism into him with physical force, but he was making a fatal mistake that would cost him his reputation. He thought Private Cassius Clay was standing before him. He didn't realize he was looking into the eyes of a man who had already ceased to be an athlete and had become an idea. But to understand the full surrealism of this moment, you need to lower your gaze. Forget about the general's epaulets for a second and look at Muhammad Ali's hands. This is that very detail, that dagger, which most historians miss, but which explains everything. Ali was dressed in an immaculate funeral black suit, and his hands, the very hands that brought him millions of dollars and the title of world champion, were deeply, demonstratively hidden in his trouser pockets. Remember this. This isn't the pose of a relaxed show-off. It is a straitjacket he voluntarily put on himself. Ali knew. His fists were officially registered as lethal weapons. If he took them out now, if he even twitched toward the officer, he wouldn't just be jailed for draft evasion. He would be locked up for assaulting a superior officer. The general knew this too, and he used this knowledge as a weapon. He provoked. He craved for Ali to take his hands out, because then the system wins. Then Ali becomes just a criminal, not a martyr. "Step forward, Private Clay," the general roared, and this scream echoed off the tiled floor, causing 24 other recruits lined up against the wall to flinch. They stood with their heads hunched into their shoulders, afraid to even breathe. For them, this order was law. For Ali, it was empty noise. He didn't move a muscle. Even his eyelashes didn't flicker. He continued to look through the general, to where, behind the dirty window, lay the freedom they were trying to take from him. The silence that followed the scream was deafening. One could only hear the old ventilation system humming, unsuccessfully trying to disperse the tension, and the officer breathing heavily, with a wheeze. The general took a step forward. He violated personal space. He came so close that Ali could smell his cheap tobacco and morning coffee. It was an invasion. It was an attempt to physically suppress the will. Ask yourself honestly, looking truth in the eye, what would you have done? When a machine of state coercion stands before you, when you face 5 years in federal prison, a $10,000 fine, and the loss of everything you achieved through sweat and blood? Most of us would have taken that step forward, simply out of animal terror before the system. We would have betrayed our principles to maintain comfort. But Ali stood, and this inaction enraged the general more than any blow. The officer saw in this silence not fear, but arrogance. He saw a mirror reflecting his own helplessness. "Are you deaf, boy?" the general hissed, switching to a forbidden tactic, using a racial slur like a whip. "There is no referee here. There are no ropes here. Here you are nobody. You will go into those jungles, and you will kill who we order you to, or you will rot in a cage." The Santa Barbara effect kicked in instantly. We thought this was a bureaucratic procedure, just a formal refusal. But the situation spiraled out of control. The general lost face in front of the formation. His authority was melting with every second of Ali's silence. He needed action. He needed a reaction. He raised the baton again, and this time it wasn't a threat. It was intent. The muscles in his arm tensed. He was going to strike Ali on the legs, a classic move to knock a man to his knees, humiliate him, force him to physically become lower. Ali saw this movement with his peripheral vision. He understood that in a fraction of a second, rubber would smash into his shin, shattering the bone. But he still didn't take his hands out of his pockets. Why? Was he ready to accept the pain? Or was he preparing something beyond the understanding of an ordinary soldier? The smell of ozone hung in the air, heralding a storm, and at that moment, time in the Houston Induction Center stopped, awaiting a resolution that would overturn the concept of strength. Whistle. The sound of slicing air was so sharp and high-pitched that it resembled the whine of a ricocheting bullet. But it wasn't a bullet. It was heavy, reinforced rubber flying at killing speed toward the point where Muhammad Ali's kneecap had been a second ago. At that moment, time in the Houston Induction Center didn't just slow down. It shattered into 1,000,000 shards, each reflecting the same impossible picture. The general's muscles, hardened by years of service, worked perfectly, putting all the inertia of his massive body and all the fury of a bruised ego into the strike. Physics dictates when such an object meets an obstacle, there must be a crunch, the sound of breaking bone, a scream of pain. We were all waiting for it. The recruits by the wall squeezed their eyes shut, preparing to hear the fall of an idol. But instead of a sickening crunch, there was only the dull, humiliating slap of rubber against the void, accompanied by the shuffling of the officer losing his balance. You think Ali jumped back? You think he used his famous footwork to move to a safe distance? That would have been logical, but it would have been an admission that he was participating in a fight. And Ali wasn't fighting. He was protesting. His feet remained in the same spot, nailed to the cheap tile. He simply shifted his center of gravity, an elusive, ghostly movement of the hips, that very microscopic shift of reality that made Sonny Liston and Joe Frazier miss. The baton passed a millimeter from the black fabric of his trousers without even grazing a thread. And here begins the real psychological horror. The general, expecting to meet the resistance of flesh, fell into an inertial pit. His body, carried by the swing, jerked forward. He stumbled. His perfectly polished boots slid across the floor, and he nearly collapsed at the feet of the one he intended to humiliate. It was a scene from a silent movie turned tragedy. A high-ranking officer, a symbol of U.S. power, staggered like a drunken sailor, trying to catch the air with his hands so as not to fall face-first into the dirt. And above him, towering like a black cliff, stood Ali. And here's the detail that blows the mind. His hands were still in his pockets. He didn't even take them out for balance. It was an absolute, total disregard for the laws of physics and subordination. If he had blocked the blow, it would have been self-defense. But he allowed the general to strike the air, turning an act of aggression into an act of clownery. Silence hung in the room, but it was no longer the silence of fear. It was the silence of shock. The recruits opened their eyes and saw not a broken private, but an imperturbable king looking at the gasping general, not with anger, but with icy, piercing calm. The general regained his balance. His face changed color from crimson to deathly pale, and then to purple. Shame. Burning, unbearable shame flooded his consciousness, but instantly transformed into pure, distilled hatred. He realized he had just lost without starting a fight. He realized this black guy in a suit had made a laughingstock of him in front of subordinates, and now it was personal. The general straightened up, breathing heavily, his chest heaving like blacksmith's bellows. He gripped the baton so hard his knuckles turned white. He couldn't strike again. A second miss would destroy his reputation completely. He needed another weapon, a weapon that hits harder than rubber. "You think this is a game, son?" he wheezed, his voice trembling with suppressed rage. He stepped right up to Ali, violating all conceivable boundaries, the visor of his cap almost pressing against the champion's forehead. "You think your lawyers will save you. You think your millions will save you." The general began poking a finger into Ali's chest, hard, painfully. Every poke was like a strike with a nail. I will erase you. I will send you to Leavenworth. You will break rocks until your arms fall off. You will rot in solitary, and no one will even remember your name. You will die a nobody. This was the moment of truth. The Santa Barbara effect. Flipped the board. We thought the physical threat had passed, but now Ali faced the threat of total destruction of his life. The general was hitting where it hurt most, his legacy. He threatened to take not his health, but his future. Ali stood, feeling these pokes in his chest. Each one was a provocation. The general begged, "Come on, hit me, take your hands out, give me a reason to shoot you right here." Ali's heartbeat must have been off the charts. Anyone else in his place would have either broken down and cried or snapped and struck. But Ali's face remained motionless, like a pharaoh's mask. He looked into the officer's mad eyes and saw fear there, the fear of the system before the individual. And then Ali did something that made the general recoil. He didn't scream. He smiled, barely noticeably with the corners of his lips. And that smile was scarier than any fist. It said, "You cannot take what does not belong to you." Ali took a breath, preparing to speak words that would rewrite civil rights history. But the general, anticipating him, made a last, desperate attempt to regain control. The general recoiled as if Ali's smile wasn't a facial movement, but a flash of radiation burning the skin. In this stuffy room, where the air was saturated with fear and cheap tobacco, a tectonic shift occurred that none of the recruits present could comprehend with their minds, but felt in their guts. The officer, used to breaking the backbones of will with a single glance, suddenly realized that his toolkit, screams, threats, the baton, was useless against a man who had already made the most terrible decision of his life. The general expected to see rebellion, aggression, a plea for mercy, anything that fit into his worldview where there is a superior and a subordinate. But he saw calm, and this calm was scarier than any rebellion, because rebellion can be suppressed, but emptiness cannot be suppressed. What does the system do when it cannot break an individual with force? It changes tactics. It tries to buy him. The general slowly lowered the baton. His face, just distorted by rage, suddenly smoothed out, turning into a mask of cold, bureaucratic benevolence that was far more frightening than his screaming. He took a step back to his desk and picked up a sheet of paper. It wasn't an arrest warrant. It wasn't a court summons. It was an assignment form. The general looked at the trembling recruits by the wall, then shifted his gaze to Ali and said what was supposed to be the final nail in the coffin of the champion's resistance. "You think you're a martyr, Clay? You think you're dying for an idea?" His voice became quiet, insinuating, like the rustle of a snake in dry grass. "Look at these guys. They're going to the jungle. They're going to swallow dirt and lead. And you?" The general walked up to Ali closely, holding the paper in front of his face. We expected him to tear it up. We expected a new outburst of anger. But then the Santa Barbara effect kicked in, turning everything upside down. The general wasn't threatening. He was offering a deal with the devil in epaulets. "Take a step forward, son. Just one step. And I promise you, you will never see Vietnam. You will tour bases, shake hands, box in exhibition matches, and sleep in clean sheets. You will keep your millions. You will keep your belt. You just need to pretend you're with us." Silence hung in the room, but now it was sticky, seductive. The general was hitting the weakest spot of any human, the instinct of self-preservation and greed. Why lose everything if you can save face and money by simply formally submitting? This was a moment of truth that would take any viewer's breath away. Ali stood before a choice: become a rich trader or a destitute hero. The recruits by the wall raised their heads. Hope could be read in their eyes. "Agree, fool. Agree, and maybe we'll get a bit of your luck too." It seemed Ali wavered. His shoulders dropped slightly. The general noticed this microscopic movement and smiled triumphantly. He was sure he had found the key. Everyone has a price. It's just a question of the amount. Come on, Cassius, the officer whispered, holding out a pen. Just sign. Just step. And you are free. But why doesn't Ali take the pen? Why are his hands still in his pockets, as if glued to the lining of his trousers? At this moment, the viewer begins to realize that something strange is happening. Ali isn't looking at the paper. He is looking at the general, the way a doctor looks at a terminally ill patient, with pity. He slowly shakes his head. This movement is barely perceptible, but for the general, it is equivalent to a slap in the face. The smile slides off the officer's face, giving way to pure animal terror. He realizes he wasn't just rejected. He was humiliated by the fact that his offer was deemed filth, unworthy of even a touch. "You don't hear me!" The general's voice broke into a squeal. The mask of benevolence cracked. He threw the paper on the floor. The sheet glided to Ali's feet like a white flag of common sense surrendering. The general grabbed Ali by the lapels of his jacket. It was desperation. He was trying to physically shake a mountain. "You don't understand. If you don't take the step, I will destroy you. I will erase your name from history. Your children will be ashamed of your last name." He shook Ali, but the champion stood unbreakable, like a rock against which waves crash. And in this shaking, in this chaos, something fell out of Ali's pocket. A small object that hit the tile with a clink. Everyone froze. The general let go of the jacket and looked down. On the floor lay not a knife, not brass knuckles. It was a small, cheap pin. A pin with the U.S. flag, but crossed out with a black marker. Where did it come from? Why did Ali carry it with him? This question hung in the air, creating a new loop of tension. The general raised his eyes to Ali, and in his gaze one could read misunderstanding mixed with fury. He thought he was fighting a draft dodger, but now he began to realize that standing before him was something much greater. Standing before him was an ideology that couldn't be bought with clean sheets and exhibition fights. Ali, without taking his hands out of his pockets, leaned in close to the general's face. The distance vanished completely. Now they were separated by millimeters and a whole universe of beliefs. Ali took a breath, and everyone in the room understood. It won't be an excuse that sounds now. It will be a verdict. The general tried to cover his mouth with his hand, but was too late. The words were already tearing out, ready to blow up this barracks and the whole world. The general's hand, gloved in a white dress glove, froze a centimeter from Muhammad Ali's lips, and this trembling hand was a symbol of the entire American military machine, which had suddenly collided with a force not subject to ballistics or regulations. In this stuffy room, smelling of cheap linoleum and crushed hopes, time coiled into a tight spring. The general wanted to physically shut the champion's mouth, to plug this fountain of truth that threatened to flood the entire induction center, but he couldn't touch Ali. Why? Because the instinct of an old soldier screamed at him, "If you touch him now, you will turn him from an accused into a victim, and yourself into an executioner." It was a trap, set not in the ring, but in the space of pure psychology. Ali didn't recoil. He looked at this trembling glove in front of his face with the same calm curiosity with which an entomologist looks at a rare beetle. He knew the general wouldn't strike. He knew the system fears martyrs more than enemy armies. Ali took a deep breath. Air entered his lungs with a whistle, and this sound in the deathly silence seemed deafening, like the cocking of a shutter before an execution. The general slowly lowered his hand, realizing he had lost the battle for silence. And then Ali spoke. He didn't shout. He didn't use that stage roar with which he scared Sonny Liston. He spoke quietly, with rhythmic, frightening clarity, hammering every word into the consciousness of those present like nails into the coffin lid of the Vietnam War. "You want me to put on a uniform and fly 10,000 miles to drop bombs and bullets on brown people in Vietnam?" he asked, and his gaze slid over the faces of the recruits frozen by the wall. "While so-called Negroes in Louisville live like dogs and are denied basic human rights." It wasn't just a refusal. It was an indictment. The general turned pale. He looked back at the recruits. He saw a spark of understanding ignite in their eyes, which a minute ago were filled with fear. Ali was doing what the Pentagon feared. He was infecting them with doubt. "No, I will not go," Ali continued, and his voice became harder than steel. "I will not help murder and burn a poor nation simply to continue the domination of white slave masters over the darker people of the world." And then he uttered that very phrase which became the climax, that very intellectual orgasm that tore reality into before and after. He leaned to the general's very ear, as if entrusting him with a terrible secret, and whispered, "My enemy is the white people, not the Viet Cong, sir. No Viet Cong ever called me nigger." These words hung in the air, heavy and toxic as mustard gas. The general recoiled as if he had received a physical blow to the solar plexus. He gasped for air, his face going blotchy red. He realized what had just happened. Ali didn't just refuse service. He publicly, in the heart of a military base, declared war on America itself. He tore off the mask of patriotism and revealed the ugly face of racism hidden beneath it. The Santa Barbara effect flipped the situation upside down. The general, who was supposed to be the judge, suddenly found himself in the dock. He was a representative of a system that oppressed its own people, and Ali had just rubbed his nose in it. But the scariest thing for the general wasn't in the words. The scariest thing was what happened next. Ali finally made a move. That very dagger, his hands in his pockets, was to play its final role. We waited for him to take out his fists. We waited for resistance. But Ali slowly, demonstratively, took his hands out of his trouser pockets. His palms were empty. He raised them up, showing everyone, "Look, I am unarmed. My strength is not in fists." Then he slowly bent down to the floor. The general flinched, expecting a trick, but Ali simply picked up that very little pin with the crossed-out flag that had fallen earlier. He clenched it in his fist, straightened up, and looked the general straight in the eye. "You can take my title," Ali said, and in his voice sounded the infinite weariness of a man carrying the weight of the whole world on his shoulders. "You can take my money. You can lock my body in jail, but you cannot lock my mind. And you, General, know this better than anyone, because right now, standing in this uniform, with this weapon, you are a slave, and I am free." The general froze. His world collapsed. He realized the monstrous irony. He, the man with power, was a cog in the system, obliged to obey orders, while this black guy facing prison was the only free man in the room. The recruits by the wall lowered their heads, hiding their eyes, because they were ashamed to look at their commander. Ali destroyed his authority, not with force, but with truth. And in this ringing silence, the general realized he had nothing to answer. He had regulations, he had a baton, but he didn't have the truth. The heavy metal door of the induction center, painted a dreary gray, opened before Muhammad Ali with a long, mournful creak that sounded like a final gong in the dead silence of the room. The champion didn't turn around. He didn't cast a farewell glance at the defeated general, who now resembled a deflated rubber doll in an expensive uniform. Ali stepped over the threshold, and the bright Texas sun hit him in the face, creating a blinding halo around his figure. For the recruits left in the gloom of the barracks, it looked as if a prophet was ascending to the heavens, leaving them in purgatory. The door slammed shut. The click of the lock cut Ali off from the system that tried to digest him, but broke its teeth on him. Only the smell of ozone after a storm, and the heavy, raspy breathing of the officer, who was still clutching the useless baton in his hand, remained in the room. "You think this is the end? You think Ali just went home to drink lemonade? Oh, how naive you are." The real drama began the very second he stepped outside, because the freedom he chose had a price that no other person on the planet could pay. At the moment Ali descended the steps of the induction center, he was the richest and most famous athlete in the world, but with every step, he was losing everything. The first step, and they take his passport. The second, and the New York State Athletic Commission cancels his boxing license. The third, and the World Boxing Association strips him of the world champion title. By the time the sole of his shoe touched the pavement, he was officially unemployed, a criminal awaiting trial, and an outcast hated by half of America. The general, left in the office, knew this. He walked to the window, moved the blinds aside, and watched Ali walk to his car. The officer smirked, thinking he had won in the long run. "You will rot, Clay," he whispered. "You will die in poverty." But the general didn't see what we saw. He was looking at the back of a man who lost a career, but we saw a man who found immortality. Ali sacrificed his prime, the best years of physical fitness, from 25 to 29, in order not to betray his conscience. Do you realize the scale of this sacrifice? Imagine if Michelangelo were forbidden to paint, or Mozart to play, at the very peak of their genius. But let's return to the room where the recruits remained. The Santa Barbara effect continues to work even after the protagonist leaves. The young guys, who were supposed to head to the Mekong jungles in a month, exchanged glances. There was no longer blind obedience in their eyes. A virus of doubt had settled there, which Ali introduced into this sterile environment with a single phrase. One of them, a skinny kid from Alabama, looked at the general, then at his rifle, and slowly lowered it, barrel to the floor. It was a microscopic rebellion. The general saw it. He wanted to scream, wanted to order them to drop and give him 20, but the words got stuck in his throat. He realized that Ali didn't just leave. He took the soul of this army with him. The general suddenly felt the weight of his epaulets. They no longer seemed like eagle's wings. They seemed like shackles. Ali was right. A man in uniform, executing someone else's will against his conscience, is a slave, even if he has the power to command. History judged them cruelly and beautifully. The general vanished into obscurity, becoming a line in the Pentagon archives. Ali returned 3.5 years later to reclaim his throne, but he returned different. He became slower, he began to take hits, but his greatness went beyond sports. He became a symbol for every person on earth who was told to know their place. That very dagger, his hands in his pockets, turned out to be prophetic. He didn't take them out to strike, because his real battle wasn't with people, but with ideas, and he knocked out the system without even taking off his jacket. And now I want you to stop and look into the mirror of your soul. We live in a comfortable world where principles are often sold for a mortgage or a quiet life. Ali lost millions of dollars and the best years of his life just to say no. Ask yourself honestly, could you? Imagine they come to you and say, "Betray your beliefs, and we will give you everything. Refuse, and we will take everything." What would you choose? Many call Ali a draft dodger and a coward who was afraid of war. Others call him the greatest civil rights hero. Where is the line between betrayal of the state and loyalty to oneself? Write one word in the comments: traitor, if you believe he was obliged to serve like everyone else, or free, if you consider his act the highest form of courage. I will read every answer. B,